Owen Ralston rode into the New Mexico Territory on a Tuesday in the spring of 1884, with nothing but a worn saddle, a bay horse named Cinder, and a debt that had been sitting on his chest like a stone for 15 years. The land out here was the kind of beautiful that punished you for not paying attention to it, red mesas rising out of scrub and sage. The sky stretched wide and pale blue above everything, the wind carrying the smell of juniper and dry earth. Owen had crossed through Texas and the Panhandle country to get here, sleeping rough most nights, eating what he could find or buy, moving steady and purposeful the way a man moves when he finally decides to do the thing he has been putting off for too long. He was 34 years old, lean and sun-darkened, with the kind of face that told stories without speaking, a scar along his jaw from a knife fight in Abilene when he was 20, hands calloused and capable. Eyes the color of river water, green-gray and still, the kind of eyes that watched everything but gave away very little. He wore a single colt on his hip, a battered hat, and a canvas duster that had seen better years. He was not a remarkable-looking man, not in the way that drew immediate attention, but there was something about the way he sat his horse that made people look twice, a steadiness, a deliberateness, as though every movement was considered before it was made. He had been 19 years old when Henry Redmond saved his life. It had been the winter of 1869, along the Canadian River up in the Indian Territory, and Owen had been a foolish young cowhand who had gotten himself separated from a cattle drive during a blue norther that blew down out of the plains so fast and so cold that it turned the air white. He had been half frozen, lost, and very nearly dead when Henry Redmond, a rancher out of the New Mexico Territory who had been up that way on business, had come across him half buried in a snowdrift and dragged him onto his horse. Henry had taken him to a nearby trading post, warmed him, fed him, kept him awake through the worst of it when Owen's extremities had gone so cold he could barely feel his own fingers. The man had spent 3 days nursing a stranger back to health, and when Owen was well enough to stand, Henry Redmond had pressed $2 silver into his hand for the road and told him to get himself somewhere warmer. Owen had asked him why. Henry had said simply, because it was the right thing to do. Owen had carried those words with him for 15 years. He had carried the name, too, and the general description of where Henry Redmond had said his ranch was a spread called the Box R, southeast of a small settlement called Durango Wells, not far from the Cimarron Range foothills. He had always meant to go there. He had always found a reason not to, or found himself somewhere else, or told himself there was time enough yet. A man accumulates a lot of excuses over 15 years. But then last fall in Laredo, he had run into a man named Hicks who had passed through the New Mexico Territory, and Hicks had mentioned a place called Durango Wells in passing, mentioned it the way travelers do, casually, as if it was nothing more than a dot on a map. And something in Owen had shifted. He had looked at himself in the dirty mirror above the bar that night and thought, 15 years is long enough. So here he was. The settlement of Durango Wells emerged from the desert in the late afternoon, when the light was going copper and long shadows stretched from every rock and post. It was not a large place. A main street with a general store, a livery stable, a saloon called the Red Ace, a small post office, a church at the far end with white paint peeling off its boards, and a scattering of adobe and timber buildings in between. There was a smithy, a doctor's office with a hand-painted sign, and a land agent's office with its shutters half closed against the afternoon sun. People moved along the boardwalks in that unhurried, purposeful way of small-town folk, who know exactly where they are going and have nowhere particularly pressing to be. Owen rode Cinder down the center of the street, taking in the details the way he always did when coming into a new place, where the exits were, where the trouble might sit, where the useful people likely spent their time. He drew a few glances, as a stranger on a road-dusty horse always would in a place this size, but no one stopped him or called out, and he kept his expression easy and neutral. He brought Cinder up to the livery stable first, because that was always the right first move. The livery man, a broad-shouldered Mexican fellow with a thick, dark mustache, came out and looked the horse over with the assessing eye of a man who knew horses the way he knew his own family. "Good horse," the livery man said, taking the reins as Owen stepped down. "You looking to board him?" "Night or two," Owen said. "Maybe longer, depending. 2 bits a night. I feed him well." "I can see that from your animals." Owen nodded toward the other horses visible in the stalls, all of them in good condition. "I am looking for a ranch called the Box R. A man named Henry Redmond. You know of him?" Something passed over the livery man's face, not evasion, but something more like careful consideration. He stroked Cinder's nose and was quiet for a moment. "I know the Box R," he said finally. "Everybody around here knows it. Southeast of town, about 8 miles, toward the foothills." He paused again. "Henry Redmond passed away, though, going on 2 years now. His daughter runs the place." Owen stood still in the late afternoon sun and let that settle over him. Henry Redmond was dead. He had known in some distant, unexamined part of himself that this was always a possibility. 15 years was a long time, and the territory was not a gentle place, but hearing it spoken plainly still landed with weight. "I am sorry to hear that," Owen said, and he meant it more than the livery man could know. "He was a good man," the livery man said simply. "His daughter, Fannie, she has kept the ranch going. It has not been easy for her. That is all I will say on that." Owen nodded his thanks, paid for 2 nights in advance, and went to find himself a room and a meal. The Red Ace Saloon served food in the back room past the bar, simple and hot beans, cornbread, salt pork, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Owen ate alone at a corner table and thought about Henry Redmond's daughter. He had not known Henry had a daughter. Henry had not spoken of his family in those 3 days along the Canadian River, or if he had, Owen had been too cold and confused to retain it. He had pictured going to the ranch, shaking the man's hand, telling him what those 3 days had meant, perhaps offering a few weeks of labor if there was work to be had, a tangible return on an old debt. He had pictured it 1,000 times in 1,000 variations. He had not pictured this, but the debt was not any less real because the man it was owed to was gone. If anything, it felt more urgent, more pressing and personal. Henry Redmond had left behind a daughter who was running a ranch alone, and the livery man's voice, when he said it, has not been easy for her, had carried the particular gravity of understatement. Owen drank his coffee and looked out the dusty window at the last of the evening light going out over the mesa. He would go to the Box R in the morning. He woke before dawn, the way he always did in unfamiliar places, to the sound of wind working at the shutters of the small room above the saloon. He dressed in the dark, methodical and quiet, and was out and on the road as the first gray light began to soften the eastern horizon. The Box R road was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. A pair of worn wheel tracks leading off the main trail southeast, with a carved wooden gate post at the junction that bore a faded brand mark in the shape of a squared R. Owen turned Cinder onto the track and kept an easy pace, taking in the land around him. Good grazing country, this. The grass had come in well with the spring rains, bunch grass and grama growing thick between the sage, and the foothills of the Cimarron Range were blue and solid in the distance. There were cattle visible in the middle distance, a decent-sized herd, red and brown and white against the green. He spotted the trouble before he reached the ranch house. 3 horses were tied at the hitching post in front of the main house, a low, long adobe structure with a covered porch running the length of it. 2 men were standing on that porch, and a third was sitting on the porch rail. They were not ranch hands, or if they were someone else's, because the way they held themselves, easy, entitled, slightly contemptuous, was not the way of men who were there to work. Owen slowed Cinder to a walk and approached carefully, reading the scene. As he came closer, he could hear voices, a woman's, clear and controlled but carrying a blade of tension beneath it, and a man's, louder and more careless, the voice of someone who believed they held an advantage. He brought Cinder to a stop about 20 yards short of the house and stepped down, looping the reins over a fence post. The woman standing in the doorway of the ranch house was not what he had expected, though he would not have been able to say precisely what he had expected. She was perhaps 26 or 27, of medium height, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, a few strands loose and blowing in the morning wind. She had her father's directness in her bearing. That much Owen could tell even from this distance, something in the set of her shoulders and the angle of her chin. She was wearing a work dress and boots, and her hands were at her sides, not clenched but ready, the hands of someone who had learned to stay ready. The man doing most of the talking was thick through the chest, wearing a good hat and well-cut clothes that said money without saying class. He had two men with him who were arranged in the casual way of hired muscle, present, watchful, contributing nothing to the conversation. "Miss Redmond," the thick man was saying, his voice smooth as lamp oil, "I am being very reasonable here. The price I am offering for this place is better than fair, and you know as well as I do that a young woman alone cannot keep a ranch this size running indefinitely." "You have said that before, Mr. Cade," the woman replied. Her voice was steady and clear. "My answer is the same as it was before. The box R is not for sale. Your father had debts," Cade said, and his tone shifted slightly, an edge appearing beneath the smoothness. "Debts that passed to you. I have been patient about them, but patience runs dry." "The cattle we sold last fall covered the note at the bank," Fannie Redmond said. "Every cent of it. If you are suggesting there is some other debt I am not aware of, I would like to see documentation." "There are other arrangements," Cade said, and now his voice had shed the pleasantness almost entirely. "Between gentlemen, you understand. Your father borrowed money from me directly, not from the bank. I kept it quiet out of respect for him. Now I need to be repaid." Owen had heard enough. He had heard enough to recognize the shape of the thing. A man with money and power pressing down on a woman alone, using dubious claims to try to squeeze her off land he wanted. It was a common enough story in the territory in 1884, where the law was thin, and the distances were long, and a man with enough determination could make life very difficult for someone who had no one to stand beside them. He walked forward. "Morning," he said, pleasantly enough, coming to stand at the edge of the porch steps where all parties could see him clearly. He was not threatening, his hands were easy at his sides, but he was present, and his presence changed the arithmetic of the porch. All three men looked at him. The woman in the doorway looked at him too, and he saw in her eyes a quick, assessing intelligence, the same kind that lived in her father's eyes, he suspected. "Who are you?" Cade said. "Owen Ralston," he said. "I am a friend of the Redmond family." The slight stretch of the truth felt entirely justified. "Just rode in to see how things are going out here." Cade's eyes moved over him with professional calculation, taking in the colt, the road-worn clothes, the steadiness. Whatever he was calculating, the result was something between caution and irritation. "Miss Redmond and I are having a business conversation," Cade said. "I can see that," Owen said. "I can also see that the lady has given you her answer. Seems to me that is where the business conversation ends." The two flanking men shifted. Owen did not shift. He stood the way he stood, the way that years of hard living had taught him to stand, which was in a manner that communicated very clearly that moving him was going to cost someone something. Cade was not a stupid man. He looked at Owen for a long moment, then at Fannie Redmond, then back at Owen. "We will continue this discussion another time, Miss Redmond," he said, and the pleasantness was back in his voice, smooth and cold. He stepped down from the porch, his two men falling in around him, and they mounted and rode out without hurry, the deliberate unhaste of men who want you to know they are choosing to leave, not being driven. Owen watched them go until they were well down the road. Then he turned back to the porch. Fannie Redmond was watching him with those dark, measuring eyes, and she had not moved from the doorway. "You are not a friend of the Redmond family," she said. not accusatory, simply direct, the way of someone who preferred to deal in accurate information. "I do not know you. I would remember if I had met you." "No," Owen agreed. "I am not exactly. My name is Owen Ralston, and that part is true. I knew your father, or he knew me, which is closer to the truth. 15 years ago, along the Canadian River in the Indian Territory, Henry Redmond pulled me out of a snowbank and kept me from dying. I have been meaning to come and pay that debt ever since." Something moved in her expression, a brief, complicated motion like wind across still water. It was there, and then it was carefully composed. "My father is dead," she said. "I know. The man at the livery told me. I am sorry for it, Miss Redmond. I am genuinely sorry." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him. Behind her, through the open door of the ranch house, he could hear the soft creak of the house settling in the morning warmth, and somewhere around back, the sound of chickens going about their business. "You rode here from where?" she asked. "Laredo most recently. Before that, various places. I have been drifting for some years." "Drifting," she said, and there was no contempt in it, only careful note-taking. "What do you do, Mr. Ralston, when you are not drifting?" "Whatever needs doing. I have worked cattle, scouted for a surveying outfit, done some freighting. I am a capable hand at most ranch work. I can read and write, which I mention because some people find it useful." She looked at him for another long moment, and then, with the decision-making efficiency of someone who did not have time or resources to waste, she stepped back from the door. "Come inside," she said. "I will make coffee and you can tell me about the Canadian River." The inside of the Box R ranch house was clean and functional, and spoke clearly of a woman managing alone. Everything in its place, nothing wasted, a kind of deliberate organization that was the opposite of neglect. There was a fireplace at one end of the main room, a good pine table with 4 chairs, shelves of supplies on the wall, a bookshelf near the window with a modest but real collection of books. A shotgun hung on pegs by the door, which Owen noted approvingly. Fannie put coffee on and sat across from him at the table, and Owen told her about the Canadian River as plainly and fully as he knew how. The cattle drive, the storm, how he had gotten separated, how cold it had been, how Henry had found him, and what he had done. He did not embellish it or make himself sound better than he had been, which had been a scared, shivering, foolish young man who had nearly died of his own inexperience. Fannie listened without interrupting. When he was done, she wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like him," she said finally, and her voice had something careful in it, something held. "He was like that. He never could ride past someone who needed help." "It saved my life," Owen said. "I knew I owed him. I should have come sooner." "You came now," she said without reproach. He would have said that was what mattered. She paused. He always said that about debts and apologies and gratitude, that the timing of them matters less than the fact of them, that the thing that doesn't get said or paid back is the thing that becomes a wound. Owen looked at her, at the careful composure in her face, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting against the territory sun, the faint darkness under those eyes from too little sleep and too much worry. She was not a fragile woman, nothing about her suggested fragility, but she was tired in the deep way that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time without help. "What is the situation here?" he said. "With Cade? Is what he is saying about debts true?" She set down her cup. "No. My father did occasionally borrow from Cade in the early years. Cash-poor ranchers sometimes do, when the bank is slow and the need is immediate. But those debts were paid. I have the receipts. Cade is lying about the direct debt, or he believes it so thoroughly he has persuaded himself it is true, which amounts to the same thing in terms of how I have to deal with him." "What does he want with the Box R?" "Water," she said simply. "There is a spring on the northeast pasture that is the best water source for 15 miles. Cade has been buying up land to the north and east, building himself an empire out here. The Box R sits in the middle of it, and he cannot consolidate what he is building without this land. He is going to keep coming," Owen said. "Yes," she said, "he is going to keep coming." and eventually he is going to try something more direct than showing up on my porch with 2 hired men and a story about debts." Owen turned his coffee cup on the table, thinking. "How many hands do you have?" "One," she said, with a faint, tired humor. "Delfino. He has been with the ranch since before I was born, more or less. He is 61 years old and his left knee gives him trouble in cold weather. He is loyal to the bone and worth 3 ordinary men on most days, but 1 man and 1 woman cannot run a cattle operation this size indefinitely, and Cade knows that." "How many cattle?" 83 head, after last fall's sell-off. "I have been thinking about increasing the herd, but that requires money I do not currently have, and it requires hands I cannot afford to pay." Owen looked at the table. He looked at the window, where the morning light was coming in gold and clear, and the box R's land spread out beneath it, good grass and good water and the blue edge of the mountains. He thought about Henry Redmond telling a shivering young man that it was the right thing to do. He thought about 15 years. "I am not looking for wages," he said. "I am looking to repay a debt. If you need a hand, I am offering my labor free of charge for as long as it is useful to you. I know cattle. I know how to handle trouble. I can deal with Cade and his men without making it into a shooting affair, at least for as long as that remains possible." Fannie Redmond looked at him across the table for a long, careful moment. "Mr. Ralston," she said, "I have been on my own here for 2 years. I have learned to be very careful about accepting help from men I do not know, because in my experience, help from men I do not know tends to come with conditions that appear after the fact." "That is wise," Owen said. "I would say the same thing in your position. I can only tell you that my condition appeared 15 years ago on the Canadian River, and it has brought me here with nothing else attached to it. If at any point you feel that is untrue, you are welcome to put me back on the road." She watched him. He was beginning to understand, an exceptional reader of people. It showed in her eyes, in the way she listened and assessed, the way her father had probably passed on to her all the things worth passing on, including the instinct for genuine versus performance. "There is a bunkhouse behind the house," she said at last. "Delfino sleeps there. It is clean and dry. You are welcome to the other bunk. Meals I provide because I cook for myself and Delfino in any case. Work starts at first light." "Suits me fine," Owen said. "Do not think," she added, and her tone was clear and level, "that this means I trust you. It means I am willing to extend a reasonable trial of trust which I expect you to earn." "That is all anyone can ask," Owen said. He met Delfino that afternoon, a compact, weathered man with a face like old leather and eyes like polished black stones, who sized Owen up in about 10 seconds flat and apparently reached a provisional verdict of acceptable, because he handed Owen a pair of fence pliers and pointed at the south pasture fence line without further ceremony. They spent the afternoon working the fence together, and by the time the sun was going down, they had established between them the comfortable working understanding of 2 men who both knew what they were doing and did not need to make a lot of noise about it. In the days that followed, Owen learned the box R the way a man learns a new horse, carefully, through attention and repetition, not forcing anything but letting the understanding build. It was good land, well managed within the limits of 2 people. Henry Redmond had built something worth building, and Fannie had held it together by sheer force of competence and will. The cattle were in reasonable condition, the buildings were maintained, the spring Fannie had mentioned, a clear, cold wellhead in the northeast pasture, was everything she had said it was, the kind of water source that was genuinely precious in dry country. Owen repaired fences, moved cattle, checked water sources, fixed a roof section that had been troubled by the winter's storms, rebuilt a section of the horse corral that had gone soft in a post, and did all of it with the quiet thoroughness of a man who understood that good work was its own argument. Fannie watched him. She was not obvious about it, but he was aware of her assessment the way you are aware of sunlight, constant, pervasive, and occasionally direct. She was not cold. She was too honest and too human for that, but she was measured. She would speak to him practically throughout the day, and in the evenings when the three of them ate together at the big pine table, she would talk more freely, and in those conversations Owen began to know her. She was Henry Redmond's daughter in the deepest sense, not just his blood heir but his philosophical heir. She had his directness and his practicality and his unshowy sense of what was right. She had also had a harder education than Henry probably intended for her, the education of a young woman left alone with a failing ranch and a territory full of men who thought her alone meant she was manageable. She had been dealing with Cade for the better part of a year. She had been dealing with a sequence of cowhands who either couldn't be kept on for financial reasons, or proved unreliable, or made the kind of assumptions about a woman alone that made keeping them on impossible. She had been dealing with all of it while also grieving her father, though she grieved quietly, the way of a person who does not have enough time to grieve as fully as the grief deserves. One evening, about a week after Owen's arrival, when Delfino had gone to his bunk early on account of his knee acting up, Owen and Fannie sat at the table after supper with the oil lamp between them, and she asked him about his life, really asked, in the way that she did everything directly and without social padding. "Where are you from originally?" she said. "Missouri," he said. "A small town called Callaway south of the Missouri River, farming country. Do you have family there?" "A sister. She married a farmer, has 3 children now. We write occasionally. My mother died when I was 12, my father a few years after. I left Callaway when I was 18 to go west with a cattle outfit, and I have not lived in one place for more than a season since." "Why?" she asked. He thought about that honestly. Partly because the work moved and I moved with it. Partly because I was young and the West was large and I had not yet accumulated any particular reason to stay anywhere. And partly, he paused, turning his coffee cup. Partly, I think, I was waiting to do the thing I had promised myself I would do, and until I did it there was no point in putting down roots anywhere. Fannie looked at him. "The debt to my father." "Yes. That is a strange thing to organize a life around," she said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I know that," Owen said, "but debts have weight. This one had particular weight." "He saved your life," she said. "He did, but it was more than that. He saved it without knowing me, without any reason to expect return, without any conditions. I had never experienced that before. Where I came from there were always conditions." He stopped. "I am sorry. That is more than you asked for." "No," she said, and something in her voice had shifted, a small but perceptible warming. "I asked directly, so I deserve the direct answer. My father was like that too. He organized himself around what was owed and what was right, more than around what was profitable. It cost him financially sometimes." She paused. "It made him the person he was." "It made me what I am," Owen said quietly. She looked at him across the lamp, and the night was quiet around them, and the territory was dark and vast outside the windows, and something passed between them in that moment that neither of them named, because it was too new and too careful for names. "You should know," Fannie said, standing and beginning to clear the cups, "that I have decided I trust you. As much as I trust anyone, which I realize is not a universally glowing endorsement, but it is the accurate one." "I will take it," Owen said. She almost smiled. It was the nearest thing to a smile he had seen from her, and it did something unexpected to the inside of his chest. He lay in his bunk that night listening to Delfino's quiet snoring from the other side of the bunkhouse and thought about Henry Redmond's daughter. He thought about the way she moved through the work of the ranch, efficient and capable and quietly stubborn. He thought about the books on her shelf. He had noticed the titles when he went to borrow something to read one evening with her permission. A volume of Dickens, a natural history text, a well-worn Bible, a book on cattle management, a collection of poetry with the spine so worn it had lost its title. He thought about the way she sat at the table in the evenings, straight-backed and present, the kind of person who was fully where she was and not half somewhere else. He recognized, lying in that bunk in the dark, that he was in some danger of losing his perspective on the matter. He had come here to repay a debt. That was the whole of it, the clean and simple purpose. He had not come here to develop feelings for a woman who was already burdened enough without a drifting cowboy adding himself to her complications. He closed his eyes and told himself, firmly, to keep his head straight. Cade came back 10 days after Owen's arrival, and this time he came differently. He came in the afternoon, and he came with 4 men instead of 2, and instead of riding up to the house, he sent one of his men ahead on a horse to the south pasture where Owen and Delfino were moving cattle, and the man pulled up short and looked at Owen with the deliberate contempt of a man delivering a message he has been told to deliver with contempt. "Cade wants to know if the stranger is still at the Redmond Ranch," the man said. "You can see that I am," Owen said. "He wants to know what your business is." "My business is my own," Owen said. "Same as always." The man looked at him a moment longer, then turned his horse and rode back. Delfino stood beside his horse and watched this exchange with the expression of a man who has seen a great many things in 61 years and has learned to read their trajectory accurately. "That one is going to make trouble," Delfino said. "Yes," Owen agreed. "Cade has the ear of the county land commissioner," Delfino said, which was information Owen had not yet had. "Has been working for 2 years to find some legal mechanism to take this land. He has not found one because Miss Fannie's title is clean, but he keeps looking." "I appreciate knowing that," Owen said. "I tell you because I have been here a long time," Delfino said, "and I have watched this ranch since before Miss Fannie was born, and I have watched her hold it together alone for 2 years, and there is a limit to what one woman and one old man can do. I think you already know what you are here for." He paused, looking at Owen levelly. "The question is whether you know all of it." Owen looked at the old man. "What does that mean?" Delfino almost smiled, which looked on his face the way a rare weather event looks when it finally arrives. "It means that you look at her the way a good man looks at a woman he is not yet admitting to himself that he is looking at." Owen said nothing. There was nothing particularly useful to say. "I am not complaining," Delfino said, picking up his reins. "I am just observing. Let us get these cattle to the north pasture." That evening, Owen went to Fannie and told her what Cade's man had said, and he told her about what Delfino had said regarding the land commissioner. She listened, standing at the kitchen counter with her arms folded, and nodded at specific intervals the way she nodded when she was organizing information into a plan. "I knew about the land commissioner," she said. "Cade tried to have my deed challenged on a technicality 2 years ago. My father's lawyer in Santa Fe handled it. The challenge failed, but the lawyer has retired since then, and I have not been able to afford to retain another one." "If Cade finds a legal hook," Owen said, "you need someone to counter it." "I know that," she said, with a flash of impatience not at Owen but at the situation. "I know all the things I need. The list of what I need and the list of what I have are not currently well matched." "What if I rode to Santa Fe?" Owen said. "To find a lawyer. I know my way around legal proceedings reasonably well, and I can explain the situation. We could at least establish a professional connection before Cade tries anything new." She looked at him, and in her eyes he could see the quick calculation. The same calculation she always ran, weighing what was offered against what it might cost, what it meant, what the reasonable interpretation was. He had come to understand that this was not mistrust of him specifically, but the trained reflex of a person who had learned through hard experience that the costs of accepting help were often hidden and appeared later. "Santa Fe is 3 days' ride," she said. "I know. Delfino and I can manage 3 days. I know that too." She uncrossed her arms and turned back to the counter, and there was something different in the set of her shoulders, a giving way, not of weakness but of the particular exhaustion that comes when you finally let someone share a weight. "All right," she said. "Go to Santa Fe. Ask for a firm called Hargrove and Mead. They handle land law. Tell them the full situation. I will write you a letter of introduction." He left the next morning before first light, with Fannie's letter in his breast pocket and the cool dark of the desert around him, stars still hard and bright overhead, the smell of sage and night air in his lungs. He rode thinking about the ranch behind him, about the woman he was riding for, and he let himself think about it honestly for the first time, alone on the road in the early morning without the necessity of composure. He liked her. He liked her in the simple and profound way that was more than appreciation and more than respect, though it was both of those things. He liked the way her mind worked, and the way she moved, and the stubborn dignity with which she held her position in the face of everything that pressed against it. He liked that she read poetry and kept account books and could rope a calf and sit at a table and have a conversation that went somewhere real. He liked that she did not pretend to be anything other than what she was. He was aware, also, that he had been at the Box R for 12 days and was perhaps not in the best position to assess the reliability of what he was feeling. He had been alone for a long time. He was susceptible to kindness and capable space, and Fannie Redmond offered both, along with everything else. He told himself again to be careful, and then he rode on toward Santa Fe. Santa Fe in 1884 was a proper town, with real streets and proper buildings and the mixed smell of Spanish cooking, horse, and high-altitude pine that was its particular signature. Owen found Hargrove and Mead in a building near the plaza, a proper office with glass in the windows and a young man at a front desk who took Fannie's letter with professional gravity and disappeared through an inner door. The man who came back out was perhaps 50, compact and sharp-eyed, with the air of someone who had been dealing with territorial land complications long enough to find them interesting rather than exhausting. "You represent Miss Redmond's interests," he said. "I work for her ranch," Owen said. "She is held there by the operation. I am her representative in this matter." "Sit down," the man said. "Tell me everything." Owen told him everything: the history of the Box R, the clean deed, the failed challenge 2 years ago, Cade's ongoing pressure, the false debt claim, the connection to the land commissioner. The lawyer listened the way good lawyers listen, with no expression, making small notes. When Owen was done, there was a silence. "The land commissioner connection is the part that concerns me," the lawyer said. "Cade's name has come up in other matters in the territory. He is methodical, which is more dangerous than obvious. He will not make a direct illegal move. He will look for the smallest legal gap and push through it. So what does Miss Redmond need?" "She needs me on retainer," the lawyer said, "actively watching for challenges. And she needs me to file a quiet title action to formally and publicly establish her ownership beyond any possible future challenge. It is not cheap, but it is comprehensive." He named a figure that made Owen's jaw tighten slightly. "I will carry the information back to her," Owen said. "The decision is hers." He stayed a night in Santa Fe and rode back the next morning, pushing harder to make better time. He arrived at the Box R on the evening of the 3rd day, coming in as the light was failing and the last color was going out of the western sky. Fannie was in the yard when he rode in, and the look on her face when she saw him coming down the road was something he tucked carefully away, a quick brightness, immediately composed, but he had seen it. He told her what the lawyer had said over supper, laying it all out, and she listened and asked precise questions and worked through the numbers in her head with visible concentration. "The quiet title action is the right move," she said finally. "I have been putting it off because of the cost. But Delfino and I discussed it while you were gone, and we agree. I will sell 2 steers this week and send the retainer." "I can ride into town tomorrow if you want," Owen said. She looked at him across the table, and the lamplight was warm between them, and she had a small but genuine smile on her face, the real kind, not the near kind he had seen before. "You have been riding for 3 days," she said. "You will rest tomorrow. I can send the retainer by post." He smiled back, and for a moment it was just that 2 people smiling at each other across a lamp. The days that followed had a rhythm to them that Owen found, to his own mild surprise, not just bearable but genuinely good. He had spent so many years without a particular place to be that the simple structure of ranch days, the early rising, the work, the meals, the evenings felt less like routine and more like something he had not known he was looking for. He and Delfino worked well together, the old man's steady knowledge of the land and animals complementing Owen's broader range of skills, and they developed between them the wordless efficiency of two people who respect each other's competence. The evenings were Fannie's. Not by design, not by declaration, but by the natural gravity of the situation. After supper, Delfino would retire to the bunkhouse, and Owen and Fannie would remain at the table, and the conversation had gradually become the kind that two people have when they are genuinely interested in each other's minds. She told him about growing up on the Box R, about a childhood that had been physically demanding and educationally unconventional. Her father had been a reader and had insisted she be one too, which in the territory in the 1870s was not a given for girls. She told him about the year she had spent in Santa Fe at age 17, in a school there, how the city had fascinated and suffocated her in equal measure, and how she had come back to the ranch after 1 year knowing that this land was where she belonged. She told him about her father's last years, how his health had declined gradually, how they had known it was coming but knowing had not made it any simpler. She talked about him easily enough in most respects, but Owen noticed that when she talked about the period right after his death, the first months alone, she was more careful, briefer, as if those particular memories lived in a part of her that was still tender. "You have been holding this together for 2 years," Owen said one evening. "That is a significant thing." "I am aware of that," she said, but without self-congratulation. "I also know very well how close to the edge I have been, financially and otherwise. If Cade succeeds in whatever he is planning, or if we have a bad drought or a disease runs through the cattle, I could lose all of it. I think about that." "How do you carry that?" he said. She looked at him. "The same way you carry a heavy pack on a long trail. You just keep walking." He thought about that for a while. Outside, a coyote called from somewhere toward the foothills, the sound thin and clear in the dark. He had come to love the night sounds of this particular place in the weeks he had been here, the coyotes and the wind and the occasional far-off owl, the particular quiet that was not really quiet at all. "Fannie," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, and he watched to see how she received it. She received it with no protest, only a slight and carefully controlled change in expression. "I want to say something that I want you to receive only as information, without any obligation attached to it." "That is an unusual preamble," she said. "I know, but I mean it. I am not saying this to create a circumstance. I am saying it because I think it is honest and because you have a right to know where I stand." He looked at the lamp, then back at her. "I came here with a purpose that was about your father and a debt. That is still true, but I stay every day and would stay tomorrow and the day after because of you, not because of the debt. The debt is paid, the staying is something else." She was very still across the table. "I am telling you this," he said, "because you are a woman who deserves accurate information about the people in her orbit, and you deserve to know that my interest in this ranch and in your situation is not neutral. I am not neutral about you." He paused. "That is all. I'm not asking for anything. I understand that you have reasons to keep things ordered and practical here. I just wanted to say the true thing." The silence that followed was long enough that he began to wonder if he had miscalculated badly. Fannie had her eyes on the table, her hands still around her cup, and he could not read what was happening in her face. Then she looked up, and her eyes were very direct and very warm. "Owen," she said, "I have been telling myself for 3 weeks that you are a useful hand and a decent man, and that is the full extent of what you are to me." "And," he said, "and I'm a better reader of accounts than I am of my own heart, apparently, because I have been telling myself an incomplete story." She set down her cup. "I notice when you are not in the room. I have not noticed that about anyone in a very long time. I think that constitutes information." They looked at each other across the lamp, and the feeling that filled the room was too large and too clean to be anything other than what it was. "Then I will not retract what I said," Owen said. "I would not ask you to," she replied. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and she turned her hand and held his. And that was enough for now, simply that, warm and present and real in the lamplight, the territory dark and wide around the small bright house. In the days after that, nothing changed dramatically in the practical work of the ranch, but something had shifted in the air between them, the way air shifts before a weather change, not yet the thing itself, but unmistakably the precursor to it. They were easier with each other, more willing to let the other one see them, and the evenings at the table grew longer and less guarded, until they were sometimes still sitting there past 10 o'clock talking about everything from cattle prices to the nature of justice in the territory to what they each thought happened after a person died. He kissed her for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in late April, standing at the fence of the north pasture with the cattle moving peacefully below them and the mountains sharp against the blue sky. He had been standing beside her pointing out a spot in the fence line he wanted to fix, and she had turned to look at him and they had been very close, and he had asked her, quietly and clearly, if he might kiss her. She had looked at him for a moment with that dark, serious gaze, and then she had said simply, yes. It was a gentle kiss, careful and real, and when they separated she was looking at him with something in her face that he thought was probably the same thing that was in his. Delfino, who had been working on the far side of the pasture and was absolutely not watching them, was conspicuously absorbed in his fence post for a remarkably long time. May came in warm, and the ranch work intensified as the season turned brandings, moving cattle to better grazing, repairing the irrigation channel from the spring to the kitchen garden. Owen worked from first light to last, and Fannie worked beside him more than she had in the early weeks, as if she no longer needed to maintain a careful professional distance in the actual physical operation of the ranch. Cade did not come again in person, but his presence made itself felt in subtler ways. One of his riders came past on the eastern boundary road twice in the same week, slow and deliberate, as if measuring something. Then a man from the county land office came out to verify the boundary markers, which Fannie received calmly and handled correctly, walking the man around with the deed in hand, and the markers all properly in place. The land commissioner's office had no legal basis for complaint, and the man left without incident, but the visit itself was a message. Owen wrote to the lawyer in Santa Fe the day after the land office man's visit, detailing the visit and requesting that the quiet title action be accelerated if possible. The lawyer replied within the week that it was in progress and should be complete within 60 days. June brought a different trouble, not from Cade but from the weather. A late drought settled over the country southeast of the Cimarron foothills, and 3 weeks without rain put the grass into stress and pushed the cattle toward the spring water source with greater frequency and urgency. The spring held, but barely. The flow had reduced to something that needed managing, careful rotation of the cattle through the pastures to prevent overuse of any one section. Owen worked the water management with Delfino, mapping out a rotation schedule that would keep the cattle from damaging the most critical areas, and he and Fannie spent several evenings over the maps and account books working out contingencies. It was in these working sessions that he saw most clearly what she was, a genuinely excellent manager of a complex, fragile operation, capable of holding multiple variables in mind simultaneously and making decisions under uncertainty with neither paralysis nor rashness. "You are very good at this," he told her one evening, looking up from the map. She blinked at him as if the statement had come from an unexpected direction. "At what?" "All of it. Managing the ranch. Making decisions under pressure. You should have 10 people helping you, not one old man and a drifter." She laughed, a real laugh, brief and bright, and the sound of it did the thing to his chest it always did. "You are not a drifter," she said. "A drifter does not make irrigation schedules and write letters to lawyers and fix fence lines before breakfast." "I was a drifter," he said. "I am less clear on what I currently am." She met his eyes. "You are here," she said. "That is what you currently are." The rains came back in the first week of July and the grass recovered and the worst of the drought worry passed. The quiet title action completed in late July, and the lawyer sent the documentation by post, a thick, formal envelope that Fannie opened at the kitchen table with Owen and Delfino standing beside her, reading through the dense legal language with the focus of someone who needed to understand what they were holding. "It is done," she said, looking up. "The title is confirmed and recorded and formally recognized. Cade has no more legal angles left." Owen watched her face as she absorbed this, the careful, contained relief of someone who has been holding a specific anxiety for a long time and has just been allowed to set it down. He wanted to touch her face, but Delfino was standing right there with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has just witnessed justice administered correctly, so Owen confined himself to putting a hand on her shoulder. Delfino said, "Good," which from him had the weight of a standing ovation. Cade came one final time in early August. He came alone this time, and on foot. He rode to the gate and dismounted and walked up to the house, which was such an unprecedented approach that Owen, who saw him coming from the yard, went still and watched with careful attention to try to read the message in the manner of arrival. Fannie came out onto the porch when she heard the footsteps. Owen stayed in the yard, close enough to be present, far enough not to be crowding the conversation. Cade was a different man in this visit than he had been in the first, not broken exactly, but arrived at a different point. He stood at the foot of the porch steps with his hat in his hands, and the smoothness that had been his primary weapon was diminished. "I have been notified about the title action," he said. "Then you know the matter is settled," Fannie said. "I know it is settled," he agreed, and his voice was flat and honest, the voice of a man delivering information rather than a performance. "I also know I have pushed on this in ways that were not decent, and I want to say that plainly. I was willing to use pressure that I should not have used. Your father was a man I respected, and what I was doing to his daughter was not something he would have respected." The porch was quiet. Owen watched Fannie receive this and watched her decide what to do with it. "My father was the kind of man who believed a person could recognize when they were going in the wrong direction," she said. "He would have given you credit for stopping." Cade nodded once. He looked like a man who had sat with something uncomfortable long enough to move through to the other side of it. "I will not be back here in the way I have been," he said. "The offer to buy the ranch still stands if you ever change your mind, but the pressure is done." "I appreciate you saying that," Fannie said. He put his hat back on, nodded once to Owen in the yard, a man-to-man acknowledgement of a kind Owen received neutrally, and walked back down the road to his horse. Owen came to stand at the foot of the porch steps after Cade had gone, and Fannie was standing above him on the porch, and they looked at each other. "That is over," she said. "Yes," he said. "I did not expect it to end like that." "Neither did I," Owen said, "but it is a better ending than the alternatives." She came down the porch steps and stood in front of him, and in the morning light, with the threat of the last 2 years finally removed from her horizon, her face was different, lighter, more fully present, as if something she had been bracing against had been lifted. She looked, he thought, like the land after rain. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right," he said. "When my father died, I told myself that this ranch was all I had left of him, and that keeping it was the only obligation I owed to his memory. I organized myself around that. I stopped thinking about anything beyond it, beyond the next season, the next challenge, the next problem to solve. I became very good at not thinking beyond the immediate horizon." "That sounds like survival," Owen said. "It was, and it worked until you rode up my road in May and ruined it." He looked at her. "Ruined it." She was looking at him with those dark, serious eyes, and the corner of her mouth was doing the thing it did when she was working up to saying something real. "You made me think about a longer horizon," she said. "You made me think about the kind of future that is not just about holding ground but about something being built. You made me want to think about that again after a long time of not being willing to." He was very still, watching her face. "I love you," she said. Directly, cleanly, without decoration, the way she did everything. "I thought you should know that. I thought you deserved the accurate information since you were kind enough to give it to me first." He stepped forward and put his hands on her face carefully, as if she was something precious, and she put her hands over his hands and he said, "I love you, Fannie. I have been riding toward you for 15 years without knowing it, and I would ride 15 more to get back to you." She laughed quietly, her forehead coming forward to rest against his. "You do not have to ride anywhere," she said. "You are already here." He kissed her, and she kissed him back. And this time it was not the careful first kiss at the north pasture fence, but something fuller. The kiss of two people who have said the real thing and been received. From somewhere around the side of the house, there was a distinct sound that might have been Delfino clearing his throat loudly, and then walking in the opposite direction with great purpose and speed. The summer moved through its long golden days, and the box R recovered from the drought and the stress of the past years in a way that was visible. The grass came back strong, the cattle put on weight. A section of the barn that had been patched and repatched was finally properly rebuilt with lumber Owen sourced from a mill in Durango Wells. The ranch came alive in a way it had not, perhaps, since Henry Redmond was in his prime, and Owen worked it with the particular investment of a man who is not just keeping something going but building something forward. He and Fannie talked about the future with the frank practicality that characterized everything they did together. There were conversations about cattle numbers. They agreed to increase the herd slowly, reinvesting the proceeds of sales, building toward a sustainable operation that could eventually support hired hands. There were conversations about the spring and how to improve and expand the irrigation from it to make the most of what they had. There were conversations about the lawyer in Santa Fe, who had become something of an ongoing resource, and who had quietly mentioned that Cade's land acquisitions were drawing some official attention from the territorial government. And there were other conversations, quieter and more personal, about what they wanted the years ahead to look like. Owen had never let himself think extensively about those years. He had lived in seasons, in immediate questions and immediate answers, the drifter's reflex of not planning beyond what the current road required. But sitting with Fannie in the evenings, with the lamp between them and her voice steady and thoughtful and her intelligence lighting the room, the future came into focus in a way it never had before. Not as a threat to be managed, but as a place he actually wanted to go. He asked her to marry him on an evening in early September, out on the porch after supper, with the stars beginning to show themselves in the enormous dark sky and the smell of sage and cooling earth coming up from the land. He did not make a great ceremony of it. It was not really their way. He simply said that he wanted to build his life on this land beside her, that he was asking her formally and clearly, and that she should take whatever time she needed to answer. She turned from the stars and looked at him for a moment that felt very long. "I do not need time," she said. "Yes." They were married in October, in the small church at the end of Durango Wells Main Street, with the white paint peeling off its boards and the autumn light coming through the windows in long golden columns. The ceremony was witnessed by Delfino, who wore his best clothes and looked deeply and privately satisfied, and by the livery man whose name turned out to be Cesar, and by a handful of Durango Wells residents who had come to know Fannie and felt warmly toward her, and who regarded Owen with the measured approval of a community extending its trust in increments. The minister read from the Bible and asked the required questions, and Owen answered them looking at Fannie, and Fannie answered them looking at him, and when it was done and they were standing in the small churchyard in the October sun, Owen thought about the Canadian River in 1869, and the man who had told a shivering young stranger that it was simply the right thing to do. He had not expected this. He had expected to come and pay a debt and leave. He had not expected the debt to lead him somewhere that felt, more completely than anywhere he had ever been, like home. They celebrated that evening at the ranch, a simple supper that Fannie and Delfino and Cesar's wife had conspired to make considerably more elaborate than any ordinary meal, and Delfino produced from some private reserve a bottle of good whiskey that he had apparently been saving for an occasion worthy of it. Owen made a toast to Henry Redmond, brief and honest, and Fannie raised her glass without speaking, and her eyes were bright in a way that was not entirely about the whiskey. The first winter of their marriage was hard in the way that New Mexico Territory winters could be hard. Not as brutal as the plains winters Owen had experienced further north, but cold enough, with storms coming through the Cimarron Range that brought real snow to the foothills and kept the cattle clustered in the lower pastures around the water. Owen and Delfino worked the winter range management with the easy competence that had developed between them over months, and Fannie managed the accounts and the household and the letter correspondence with the Santa Fe lawyer, and with buyers for the spring cattle sale, all of it with the same focused capability she brought to everything. But the winter evenings were the thing that Owen would remember longest, looking back on that season. The fire in the fireplace, the sound of the wind outside, Fannie's reading voice when she read aloud to him. She had a fine reading voice, clear and expressive, and the particular quality of warmth that comes from being inside with someone you love when the world outside is cold and dark. He had lived so many winters in bunkhouses and camps and the backs of wagons, the cold always finding its way in, always alone inside whatever warmth he could construct for himself. This was different. This was warmth that came from the inside out. They worked on the ranch plans through the winter evenings, sketching out the expansion of the cattle operation, calculating what they would need to hire a proper hand for the spring. A young man from Durango Wells named Tomás, 19 years old, who had grown up working cattle and who had been looking for steady employment. Owen interviewed him carefully and engaged him with honest terms and a fair wage, and Tomás arrived at the Box R in March with everything he owned in a single canvas bag and the energy and commitment of a young man given a genuine opportunity. By spring, the Box R was running at its best capacity in years. The cattle operation was growing in the steady, manageable way Owen and Fannie had planned. The spring irrigation was improved and reliable, and the ranch had the feel of an operation with forward momentum, not just surviving but building. In April, Fannie told Owen she was expecting a child. She told him at breakfast directly, without preamble, the way she did everything, set down her coffee cup and looked at him and said it. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing it, feeling it move through him in the way that genuinely transformative news moves through a person, slowly and completely, reaching parts of you that you did not know were waiting to be reached. Then he got up from the table and came around to her and took her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, and she laughed, and the laugh was the kind that comes from deep happiness. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Reasonably well at the moment. Ask me again at midday when the ground stops tilting." He laughed too. "I will fix whatever needs fixing," he said, which was not a particularly eloquent statement, but which she clearly understood as the full and sincere declaration it was, because she put her hand over his hand and held it. Delfino took the news with the expression of a man receiving information he had in some sense already decided to believe would happen, and his response was to immediately begin planning improvements to the ranch house that would be useful for a family: a widening of the back room, better shutters on the windows against dust, reinforcement of the porch railing. Owen wrote to his sister in Missouri that spring, the longest letter he had written in years, telling her everything. He told her about Henry Redmond and the debt and the journey, about Fannie and the ranch, about the marriage, about the child coming. His sister wrote back in June, a long and warm letter that concluded with an open invitation to come east for a visit whenever they were able, and with the news that she had named her newest child a boy after their father, which Owen found he could receive with uncomplicated warmth in a way that, a year earlier, he might not have been able to manage. The summer was the best the Box R had seen in years. The spring rains had been generous, the grass was thick and deep, The cattle were healthy and gaining weight ahead of the fall sale. Tamaz had turned out to be everything Owen had hoped: capable, reliable, genuinely interested in learning the full range of ranch work, rather than just the most immediately visible tasks. Owen taught him what he knew and watched the young man grow into the work, with the satisfaction of someone passing something forward. The pregnancy became visible through the summer months, and Fannie continued to work the ranch with characteristic stubbornness, accepting modifications to the harder physical work without complaint, but with very little deviation from her overall schedule. She rode side saddle to the north pasture in August to check the cattle, and returned to report with perfect composure that everything looked fine and the fence needed attention on the western boundary, which Owen had already noted and already planned to fix. "You are not going to stop," he observed, not as a complaint but as a statement of settled fact. "Not until I have to," she agreed. "And you should know by now that my definition of have to runs significantly later than most people's." "I do know that," he said. "I am not arguing, I am just making sure you know that I am watching." "I know you are watching," she said, and her tone carried a warmth that the simple words did not fully contain. He was with her all through the October night when the baby came, sitting outside the bedroom door while the doctor from Durango Wells was inside, getting up and pacing and sitting again, Delfino beside him on the bench in the hallway doing the same, the two of them not speaking much but deeply present in the way that men become present when something important and outside their control is happening. The baby arrived in the early hours before dawn, loud and healthy, and the doctor came to the door and said, "A son, Mr. Ralston, both well." Owen went in and found Fannie exhausted and absolutely present, holding the child with the same focused competence she brought to everything, as if this too was a task that needed doing correctly, and she was going to do it correctly. The baby was small and red-faced and ferociously alive, and he was looking at the world with the unfocused intensity of someone who has just arrived and finds the place very bright and very loud. Owen sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the child and then at his wife, and felt something that did not have a simple name. It was gratitude and love, and the particular terror of having something this important, and the knowledge that he was going to be worth it. He was going to make himself worth it. Everything Henry Redmond had done in 3 days along the Canadian River had led here, and Owen was going to honor that through the length of his life. "Hello," Fannie said quietly to the child, and then to Owen, "He looks like you." "He looks like a very cross old man," Owen said, which made her laugh quietly, tiredly, genuinely. They named the boy Henry. It was not a discussion that required much discussion. Henry Owen Ralston proved to be an individual of strong opinions from the very start, vocal and demanding and fascinated by everything that came into his field of vision, which was, as it turned out, everything. He grew into a sturdy, curious, dark-eyed child who wanted to be outside and moving as soon as he was physically able, and who showed, from a very early age, the capacity for single-minded focus that his mother possessed and his father had acquired. The box R grew around him. By the time Henry was walking, the cattle operation had expanded to 140 head. Tamaz had been joined by a second hired hand, a quiet, competent young man from a Pueblo community north of Santa Fe, who had been seeking work, and whom Owen had hired after a careful conversation, and who proved invaluable, and the ranch was operating at a genuine profit for the first time since Henry Redmond's health had begun to decline. Delfino's knee continued to give him trouble in cold weather, and Owen and Fannie quietly began adjusting his workload without making it obvious they were doing so, assigning him to tasks that were closer to the house and less physically demanding, which Delfino accepted with dignity and without comment, which was probably the best possible outcome. One morning in the spring of 1886, Owen went out before the household was fully awake and stood at the edge of the yard, looking out at the land in the early light. The grass was coming in green after the winter rains, the cattle were visible in the middle distance, The mountains were blue and sharp against a sky that was going from gray to gold. Behind him, the ranch house was beginning to stir. He could hear Fannie moving in the kitchen, the small domestic sounds of someone starting a fire, and from down the hall, the first experimental sounds of Henry beginning to work himself up to waking. He stood there for a long time, looking at all of it. He had been 19 years old when Henry Redmond had pulled him out of a snowbank and told him it was simply the right thing to do. He had been 34 when he had finally come to pay that debt, riding into Durango Wells on a bay horse with 15 years of intention on his chest. He had been 35 when he married the man's daughter in the peeling paint church at the end of the main street, and 36 when his son was born, and 37 standing here in the morning light of what he had built. He thought about the journey, all of it, not just the days on the road but the whole long arc of it. The drifting and the working and the telling himself there was time enough. And then the morning in Laredo when he had looked in the mirror and decided the time was now. He thought about riding up the Box R road and hearing Cade's voice from the porch and stepping forward without particular plan, but with the very clear sense that there was something here that needed doing, something that was continuous with the thing Henry Redmond had done for him 15 years before. The world turning on its small acts of decency, one thing opening into another, a life unfolding from a single moment of generosity along a frozen river in the Indian Territory. Fannie appeared at his shoulder, quiet enough that he registered her presence before he heard her approach, which was her way. She put a cup of coffee in his hand and stood beside him, looking at the same view. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "All of it," he said. "Your father, what he did, what it led to." She was quiet for a moment. "He would be glad to know you came," she said. "He would be very glad to know you stayed." "He did not do it to be paid back," Owen said. "No," she agreed. "But that does not mean he would not have been glad." Owen looked at the mountains, then at Fannie beside him, at the profile of her face in the morning light. She was 29 now, more fully herself than she had been when he arrived, less braced, more open, the particular ease of a person who is living in a life that fits them. She had the same directness, the same careful intelligence, the same capacity for total presence that had drawn him from the first days. She had also developed in the years of their marriage a warmth that was less guarded than it had been, that came more readily to the surface, because she had made the decision to let it. He had made the same decision, or the decision had been made in him by everything that had happened, and the two things were hard to separate. He was less solitary than he had been. He was less uncertain of his right to be in one place, to belong to it and to the people in it. He was becoming, for the first time in his life, fully present in his own existence. Henry Ralston toddled out of the house and across the yard toward them with the intense purposefulness of a small person who knows exactly where he is going, which was toward his father's legs, into which he crashed with cheerful force and looked up expectantly. Owen reached down and picked him up, the boy settling against his shoulder with the total comfort of someone who has never had reason to believe this particular position was anything other than absolutely safe. "The cattle need checking," Fannie said. "They do," Owen agreed. "Tamaz said the fence on the north boundary needs attention. I will look at it this morning." "Good." She reached over and straightened Henry's collar with the quick efficiency of a mother who is always attending to approximately 16 things at once. "Delfino is asking if we can look at improving the spring channel before the summer." "We can. I have been thinking about how to do it." "Of course you have," she said, with the warmth in her voice that the practical words did not fully contain. She looked at him then fully with those dark eyes that saw everything accurately. "Owen." "Yes." "This was worth it," she said. "All of it, every part of it, it was worth coming." He looked at her, holding their son against his shoulder, the morning light across the land his father-in-law had built and they were building further, the mountains steady in the distance, the world offering itself in all its difficult and genuine beauty. "Yes," he said. "It was." She took Henry's small hand in hers, and the three of them stood there in the morning. The rancher's daughter and the cowhand who had ridden across 3 territories to pay a debt, and found a life waiting for him in the place the debt led. And the spring came in warm over the mesa, and the grass came up green and strong, and the day opened in front of them full of work and love, and all the good, difficult, ordinary business of building something worth having. By fall of 1887, the Box R employed 4 hands and ran nearly 200 head of cattle. The quiet title action had long been settled. Cade had retreated entirely into his other business interests, and had, by all accounts, become a somewhat more chastened presence in the territory. The lawyer in Santa Fe had sent a letter the previous year noting that the territorial government was looking into some of Cade's land acquisition methods, which had apparently involved more creative interpretation of the law than was strictly appropriate, and that the inquiry was ongoing. Delfino's knee reached the point in the autumn of 1887 where it became clear, through patient and respectful conversation, that the coming winter would be his last as an active working hand on the ranch. He accepted the transition with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything, and Owen and Fannie made clear to him that he was not departing the ranch, that his room in the bunkhouse was his for as long as he wanted it, that his meals were his, that he was family, and that family did not expire. Delfino said, "I know," in a tone that suggested he had always known, and went back to teaching Henry, who was now 3 years old and deeply interested in horses, the proper way to approach a horse from the front so that you did not startle it. A second child came in the spring of 1888, a girl, arriving into the world with the same vigorous opinions her brother had held from the start, dark-eyed and strong from the first day. They named her Clara, after Fannie's mother who had died when Fannie was 12, and Clara Redmond Ralston grew into a child who had her mother's focused intelligence and her father's steadiness, and who spent her earliest years following her older brother around the ranch with the absolute certainty of someone who knows they belong somewhere. Owen wrote to his sister again after Clara was born, a long letter that his sister answered at equal length, and there was a warmth in their correspondence that had grown steadily over the years since he had written to tell her about Fannie. She had been glad for him in a way that was straightforward and genuine, and reading her letters, Owen had found himself thinking about Missouri less as a place he had left and more as a place that was simply a different part of the same world he now lived in fully. The Box R in those years became a fixture of the Durango Wells community in the way that a well-run, honest operation becomes a fixture known and relied upon, a source of employment and commerce, a household that was present at the community events and generous in the ways that counted. Fannie had a reputation in the wider territory as a businesswoman, which was not entirely a conventional thing for a woman in 1888, but the territory had always had its own relationship to convention, and results tended to speak more loudly than propriety in any case. Owen had a reputation of a different kind, the kind built slowly and without particular intention through the accumulation of reliable behavior over time. He was known as a man who worked hard and dealt straight and stood his ground without looking for trouble, and who had come to the territory as a stranger and built something real in it. Durango Wells knew the story, in the way that small communities know the stories of their members knew about the debt, and the journey, and the dead man's daughter and the marriage, and regarded the whole of it with the particular warmth that communities reserve for stories that confirm their belief in the possibility of good outcomes. One evening in the autumn of 1888, Owen sat with Delfino on the bunkhouse porch as the old man smoked his pipe and the stars came out enormous overhead. Henry was asleep in the house. Clara was asleep. Fannie was reading inside, the lamplight warm in the window. The cattle were quiet in the pasture. The land lay still and safe around them. "I have been thinking," Delfino said, in the way he said things when he had been thinking for some time and had reached a conclusion. "About what?" Owen said. "About this place. What it was when I came here as a young man, working for the family that owned it before Mr. Henry bought it. What it became under Mr. Henry. what it is now. He drew on his pipe. I have been here a long time. I have seen a lot of things happen to ranches in this territory. Most of them do not come out well. The land gets taken or sold or run into the ground. The people who built them get scattered. He paused. This one is going to continue, I can tell. Some things you can tell. I intend for it to, Owen said. I know you do, Delfino said. That is part of how you can tell. He smoked for a moment. Mr. Henry would have liked you. Owen received this with the full weight it carried. It was the highest thing Delfino had said to him in all the years they had worked together, and from Delfino, it was not a small thing. I would have liked to know him better, Owen said. 3 days was not enough. 3 days was enough to show you who he was, Delfino said. He showed you in 3 days the thing that some men never show in a lifetime. That you had to ride all this way to return it says something about you. That you rode all this way and found her says something about how things sometimes work out. He knocked the pipe against the porch railing. I am going to bed. My knee is bothering me. Owen sat alone on the bunkhouse porch for a while after Delfino went inside, looking at the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant cattle, the horses in the corral, the wind across the sage, the faint warm sounds from the house. He thought about Henry Redmond reaching down from a horse to pull a frozen young man up out of a snowdrift, not knowing who he was, not knowing what would come of it, knowing only that it was the right thing to do. He thought about 15 years of a debt that had become, in the end, not a burden but a compass, something that had kept him oriented, that had given his drifting a direction even when he could not see it clearly, that had brought him here. He thought about Fannie's voice in the morning when she asked him what he was thinking about. He thought about Henry toddling across the yard toward his legs. He thought about Clara's face when she laughed. He thought about all the evenings at the pine table with the lamp between them, the conversations that had added up to the sum of a life. He thought about the fact that he had ridden into Durango Wells expecting to find a man and had found, instead, everything he had not known he was looking for. He got up from the porch eventually, when the night had gone fully cool around him, and walked across the yard to the house. The lamp was still lit in the window. Fannie was still reading. He went inside and sat down across from her, and she looked up from her book, and her eyes were warm and clear. Long night, she said. Just thinking, he said. Good things. Very good things, he said. She smiled at him, the full, real smile that she gave rarely and completely, the smile that he would have ridden twice 15 years to see. She went back to her book, and he sat across from her, and the lamp burned between them, and the ranch was quiet around the house, and the territory was dark and wide and peaceful under the enormous stars, and Owen Ralston, who had spent 15 years carrying a debt and come to the New Mexico territory to pay it, understood with perfect clarity that what he had found was worth infinitely more than what he had come to give, and that the man who had told him it was simply the right thing to do had been, as it turned out, building the whole of this with that single act of kindness, whether he knew it or not. Henry Redmond's daughter turned the page, and the lamp burned warm, and the future stretched out ahead of them full of seasons and children and work and love, open and real and entirely their own.